Welcome back to College Football Addiction. I told you guys that this video was coming. I told you that we would have our hot takes. We would get to talk about all the controversy, the drama with the first round, whether it be Indiana, SMU, Clemson, or Tennessee with the late game. I told you we would do this video, and so thank you very much for your patience. If you haven't already, and you agree or disagree with anything in this video, comment below and let me know your thoughts. If you don't want to comment, maybe you can hit the subscribe button. I don't ask that every single video, but for this one, I think we're going to invoke some emotion one way or the other. And so if we can get you to agree or disagree, if you have no opinion on this, then I don't know, man. I don't know how you watch college sports and don't have an opinion on something like this. But if you do have an opinion, hate it, love it, whatever, somewhere in between, hit the subscribe button and join us for more content just like this. Let's talk about it a little bit in our video today, presented by BetUS. We had 4 mostly non-competitive first-round games. 4 games where the result was literally never in doubt. Maybe just a tad in that Clemson game when they got it down to 1 score and Texas wasn't moving the ball much. Maybe you could say that one was somewhat in doubt. I don't think Clemson was going to win. Could they have tied it up? Yes. Could they have stopped Texas late? I don't know. Probably not. Even if they had scored on that 1-yard rush to get it back down to 1 score, were they going to keep Texas from it? Probably not, right? 4 mostly non-competitive games. Recapped each one of them. And again, told you we would do this video. After the Indiana game on Friday night, the entire timeline, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media app you use, all that you saw was this team doesn't belong. SMU Penn State kicks off noon Eastern time the next day. Not competitive again. And all you heard was they don't belong. Clemson was down at one point by a ton. They did fight back. Hat tip to Clemson. They were the one team, Indiana really late too. They fought back some. But still, when they were down by so much, this was the best the ACC had to offer. They don't belong. That game was somewhat competitive. And I was gearing up to make this video not knowing how in the hell that I was going to defend the trash play that we saw from those 3 teams. I was getting ready to tell you guys that what happens in a one-off game doesn't impact what we all saw or what happened in the regular season. I was getting ready to tell you guys that we had blowouts in the 4-team playoff era. I was getting ready to tell you guys that we had blowouts before the playoff. I was getting ready to tell you that teams that were whining on social media and on ESPN really needed to just take care of their own business. ESPN's commentators, announcers, pundits, personalities were all over social media telling you why teams didn't belong. Herb Street was telling you that Indiana didn't belong. He was whining about it on game day the next morning. Peter Burns of the SEC Network was telling you all over the timeline, crying about the first 3 games. And look, I'm not necessarily here to crap on the SEC. I don't really care. We get a lot of views from SEC viewers. We get a lot of SEC folks that join our program on a regular basis, and I love them. And truth be told, I still think the SEC is the best conference in college football, and I don't really think that's close. Do they have the best teams this year? I'd probably say no. I'd probably say no to that. I think it's pretty easy to see that they may be down just a little bit this year. But to me, they're still the best. So I'm not crapping on the SEC in that way. I'm crapping on the entitlement that we saw through the first 3 games of the playoff. Lane Kiffin was crying on Twitter. Hopefully you have a Twitter account or at least logged into the app to scroll and see that. But then the Tennessee game happened. The Tennessee game happened, and a team that was 10-2, a team that was from the SEC, a team that beat Alabama, this team that had been the one that everyone propped up saying they should be in, a team that beat them, got absolutely blitzed, got absolutely dominated, and they were honestly probably the least competitive of the 4 teams that played this weekend. Yes, SMU did lose by slightly more, but their total yardage was fairly close. They kept things fairly competitive, and without the awful pick sixes, that could have been a game. This Tennessee game, though, was not, and it proves something. before I talk about that or tell you about that, I will give some quick love to BetUS. Make sure you're betting with them this postseason, through all the bowls, through all the playoffs. Use our code YouTube150. It gets you 150% deposit bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your next two. All of that up to $2,000. Again, YouTube150 is the code. Make sure you're using them. The Tennessee game proved something, but not what all the hot take merchants and all the hot take artists wanted you to think that it proved. I'll talk about what it proved in just a second, but did you hear Herb Street after the game when he went on an interview with Linda Cohn and she asked what his takeaway from the weekend was? Listen to this. Obviously, it's a still picture, so ESPN doesn't flag us, but get a load of this.
The first round is now complete. All home teams won. They not only won, but they won by double digits. What is your biggest takeaway from this first weekend of the 12-team playoff?
That I hope next year the committee won't get caught up in what the social media and a lot of people who are fringe fans get caught up in, which is wins. They had 11 wins. They must be good. Who did they beat? I think is much more important than how many wins you have. That's old school way of approaching it. Indiana having 11 wins and beating nobody, that doesn't mean they're one of the 12 best teams. Remember, I know, Linda, I'm not taking this out on you, but there's a big difference between deserving and best.
Yeah.
What this is all about is giving us the best 12 teams. Now, it's subjective. How you want to figure out the best 12 is up to you. But that's what I want to see. I don't want to hear about wins. How many wins? Winning's obviously important, but just because you have 11 wins doesn't mean you're better than a team that maybe had a tougher road that had 9 wins. So I think we get too caught up in how many wins you have. It's really more about who are the best 12 teams, and we need to get the best 12 teams in this tournament every year.
It's a fantastic point, Kirk. Thanks for making it, and thanks for joining us on SportsCenter.
It's a fantastic take, Kirk. Thanks for making it. Kirk said we need to get the best 12 teams. Listen, that is subjective. That is horse crap. That's called being a shill for your employer. ESPN very clearly has a monetary relationship that has benefited the most when SEC teams are on TV. I get it. But man, oh man, for her to say thank you for making the point, thank you for towing the company line, thank you for doing our bidding, thank you for one of the biggest voices in athletics, but certainly college athletics, thank you for saying what needed to be said. Not necessarily talking about the team that you just called a game in, getting beat by 3 times as much. My brother, you just called a game where an SEC team with 10 wins just lost by more than Indiana. Not just a little bit more, 3 times the amount. If anything, Tennessee losing by that much is an argument that Bama should have been in over Tennessee. Did anyone really think that Bama wouldn't beat Tennessee if they played head-to-head in hypothetical matchups? That's what the SEC loves to hang their hat on, is hypothetical matchups. And I know they won head-to-head earlier in the year, but that's a different team now. Clearly, they weren't ready for Ohio State. Clearly, they weren't ready for the bright lights. Clearly, they weren't ready for the moment. Why not say Bama should have been over them? They were less competitive against a lower seed. Indiana was better against a higher seed, a Notre Dame team that was ranked 6th, than Tennessee, your mighty SEC 10-win team, was against a 7 seed. That's the takeaway. Somehow his takeaway was about the Friday night game. Somehow his takeaway was about the closest game of the weekend. And I promise you guys, I'm not going to make this about Florida State. You know where my loyalty lies. But this is what Florida State fans have been telling you for the entire last 12 months about not only Kirk, but ESPN. Here's the narrative that got proven, though. It's not that SMU or Indiana or Tennessee or even Clemson didn't belong in the playoff. You can certainly make those arguments as one-off cases, one-off scenarios. It's that none of them belonged in the playoff. It's not that Alabama or Ole Miss or Tennessee or South Carolina or Miami or any of these other teams deserve to be in. It's that none of them belong. What do you mean by that, TJ? We don't need a 12-team playoff. We never did. We probably didn't need a 4-team playoff, if we're being honest. But the gap between the top 4 to 6 teams and the next 6 or so is massive, especially when you have auto bids. You look at the top 6 teams in the country right now. I think we can all agree that the best 6 teams in the country are, in whatever order you want to put them in, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Texas, Penn State, and Notre Dame. Put them in whatever order you want. I don't care. Those are unequivocally the best 6 teams in the country. Now, because of auto bids, you have Boise State in there. You have Arizona State in there. You put Clemson in there. You put Tennessee in as well. You've got other teams that were deserving because of how our format is set up, because of how our sport is set up. But nobody would argue before yesterday that those weren't the top 6 teams in the country. And there's probably a bit of a gap between a couple of them even in that grouping. You'd probably put Penn State on the lower ring of that. You might put another team down a little. There are maybe 4 or 5 teams that could win this thing, right? 6, yeah, maybe 6. And I get it. It's cute that teams get in this thing and they can say they had a chance. But nobody actually thought that Indiana, SMU, Boise State, Arizona State, maybe even Clemson were legit title contenders. And Tennessee, with how they played up and down this year against good competition, they're probably in that boat too. I think it's a little bit funny. Again, not taking massive shots at the SEC, but Clemson, a team that was voted 16th and got in on an auto bid, was literally the most competitive team this weekend. They were the most competitive team that lost this weekend, and they were the worst playing the absolute best. And don't get me started on the seeding absurdity either. Shout out my guy Brooks Austin, the film guy, who talked about some of this, but you could have avoided some of these blowouts if you didn't auto seed. You could put Notre Dame and Texas in the first round bye, right? And then you could have had SMU and Arizona State, Boise State, all those teams in the first round. And then you have a little bit more competitive games your first weekend. But then you're just moving your blowouts to the next weekend. You're going to get the same number of blowouts every year. It's going to happen. And look at how it's now set up. This is what Brooks was talking about. The conference champions now have to play the better teams. How absurd is this stupid sport? UGA, their reward for beating Texas twice and winning the SEC championship, what's their reward? You get to play Notre Dame, playing some of the best football in college football right now. And Texas, the team that lost to UGA twice, the team that was the least dominant, I'd say, this weekend, gets to play Arizona State. No shots at Kenny Dillingham. I hope they can pull the upset. I love Dilly. Oregon, a team that did what they needed to do, beat Ohio State, beat Penn State, went 13-0. They have to play a rematch against Ohio State where they're a slight dog. What's Penn State get? The team that couldn't beat Ohio State, the team that couldn't beat Oregon, they get Boise State. What the hell is that? What are we doing? ESPN is doing their absolute best, though, right now to ignore what happened to Tennessee. But if you guys will just walk back with me about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and remember what happened. Tennessee was going to be out of this playoff. We had Sports Talk Jay on. This is not a crap on Tennessee video, although they are the ones that certainly crapped the bed last night. I like Tennessee fans. You guys have been great in my comments. I love Sports Talk Jay. Don't take this as a massive shot. But if you remember back, Tennessee was the 3rd ranked of the SEC teams that were kind of below Texas and Georgia. Remember that? Tennessee was going to get left out of the playoffs. Sports Talk Jay talked about it here on this very channel with us. Tennessee was behind Alabama. Tennessee was behind Ole Miss. And their paths to get to the end of the season were pretty settled. Alabama, though, had to travel to Norman. And Ole Miss had to travel down to Gainesville. And both those teams lost inexplicably. But Tennessee at that moment was the 3rd SEC team of those 3. Tennessee was going to miss the playoffs if those 2 teams, maybe if just one of those teams, had not lost. But they slid in, warts and all. And what happened? They got exposed. But you can already hear the narrative shifting. They're not talking about that. They're not talking about the fact that, was Tennessee really deserving of a playoff spot? Kirk Herbstreit gets done calling what we thought would be the best matchup of the weekend, and it ended up being the worst matchup of the weekend. And Kirk is saying things like, I don't know about Indiana. I don't know about that team that only lost by 10. I don't know about that team that held Notre Dame down. I don't know. And you guys know where this is going, don't you? You guys are not dumb. You can see what's coming. They're going to put teams in with even more losses next season, and they're going to do it under the guise of better teams. But that's not at all what they're doing. They're putting in teams that create a better TV product, which is fine. I like entertaining games. This weekend's games were not that good. They were not that fun. I enjoyed watching. I watch everything. I get it. But just be honest with us. Don't tell us you're picking the best teams. Tell us you're picking the most entertaining games. Tell us you're picking the best TV matchups. That's what you're doing. Question for you guys. Would Alabama versus Penn State have been more entertaining than Penn State versus SMU? Absolutely. It would have been a better TV product. There would have been more hype around the game. My numbers on this channel would have done better. Our SMU previews just don't do very well. Penn State doesn't do well at all. But guess what? Alabama does great for us. Alabama does wonderful numbers for us. Click on the channel. Click on popular. Alabama litters the top. It would have been great. Would Miami versus Notre Dame have been more entertaining than Notre Dame versus Indiana? Absolutely. We didn't even do an Indiana preview. Miami numbers crush for me. They do awesome. The Miami fans actually like me more than I ever thought they would. But Miami numbers would have been amazing for me. Would have been a more entertaining game. Would have had more hype building up to it. Catholics versus convicts, all those things. That would have been an entertaining playoff game. Would Ole Miss versus Ohio State have been more entertaining than what we watched last night? Coin flip on that one. But possibly. They couldn't have played any worse than Tennessee did. So the answer is probably yes to all three. But you know why Ole Miss wasn't in over Tennessee? It's the same reason that Bama wasn't in over SMU. Same reason that Miami wasn't in over Indiana. Results on the field at some point have to matter. And you tell me right now that you think Alabama should have been in over SMU. I agree that Alabama would be favored on a neutral site field. In a neutral site game, they'd have been favored, no doubt about it. But did they deserve to get in just because they'd be favored? Alabama could have lost to Auburn and been 8-4. And they'd still be favored over SMU on a neutral site field, in a neutral site game. So at 8-4, should Alabama have been in no matter what? What if Alabama had lost that game to Georgia at 7-5? They'd still be favored over SMU in a neutral site game. Should they be in over SMU at 7-5? Eventually, the results on the field do have to matter. But what I'm telling you is this. ESPN is going to get their way. They lose and make too much money on this stuff. They're going to spend the next 11 months crafting their narratives, making sure that you remember the SMU and the Indiana losses, and hoping that they can memory hole that Tennessee loss, hoping that they can wipe that from your mind, hoping that you forget that Tennessee also got dominated by Georgia late in the year, hoping that you can also forget that Tennessee should have lost to Florida, hoping that you also forget that Tennessee lost on the road to Arkansas. But they will continue to remind you about SMU and Indiana. It's why Kirk Herbstreit, after calling the blowout dominating game of Ohio State and Tennessee, after being in the booth for that, he was asked for his takeaway, and he went back to the Indiana game on Friday night. It is so obvious what they do and what they will do. And just watch. We, as Florida State fans, warned you about it for 12 months. Over 12 months. And you guys said we were crybabies, lunatics, idiots, fringe crazy, whatever. And now you see the way that it's going. I've had so many Miami fans. I've had so many fans of different teams, SMU, Indiana, all these ones say, you know what? Those Florida State fans, they were annoying. They were loud. They were crybabies. All they do is whine, complain, whatever. But they actually had a point. I saw Georgia people saying that. George Foster, who played in the NFL and at UGA, covers the Dogs now on a podcast. He said it. I've seen it from so many people. And so just watch what these crazy lunatic FSU fans are telling you, and watch what happens with next year. Watch what happens going beyond. Because there will be 3 lost teams that get in over 1 lost teams next year. Just wait for it. Hey, I want to hear your thoughts. Again, this is not a rail on the SEC video. I know that Tennessee crapped the bed. I think Texas has a chance to win this thing. I think Georgia has a chance to win this thing. This is not crap on the SEC. It is crap on ESPN and what they are doing to this sport. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Appreciate BetUS. Appreciate you guys if you watched this. Hit the subscribe button on your way out. We appreciate you on College Football Addiction.